And so to the third and final section of this, which is really from chapter 8, verse 4, right through to the end of chapter 11. If this is the eschatological temple, it's time for the pilgrimage of the nations to Zion. That's the ancient Jewish theme, which you get in Isaiah 40 to 55, that when God does what God is going to do, then the nations will come in. Of course they will, because the God of Israel is the creator of the whole world, and Israel has been his plan for the whole world. It's been particular in order that it may be universal. So much in Enlightenment thought has wanted to erase the particular in order simply to embrace a generalized universal religion. So if it was true at all, it's got to be equally true for everybody everywhere, otherwise it seems a bit unfair. But in the biblical narrative, it's always God acting in the specific case for the benefit of the whole world. And if this is so, if the nations are to come in, one of the things that Luke really wants to stress is that this is not a Pauline oddity. You know, there was always the danger, as Luke will have been more aware than we in the early church, that many Jewish Christians will have seen the inclusion of Gentiles in the people of God as something which that dangerous radical Paul was trying to present. And in fact, the second half of the book and the last quarter of the book, which we'll get to tomorrow morning, God willing, again and again the charge against Paul when he's being put on trial or pseudo-trial is that he's a traitor to the traditions of Israel and that he is corrupting the temple and the traditions of Israel by enabling Gentiles to come in. And in this whole section, Luke 8, 9, 10 and 11, Acts 8, 9, 10 and 11, Luke is making it abundantly clear that this thing started with Philip going off to the Samaritans and others, and its climax was Peter with his vision about going to the house of Cornelius, and the conversion of Paul happens between those two to say, if you like, yes, Paul does end up as the apostle to the Gentiles, but this was not some wacky thing that he dreamed up just because he'd had this weird experience on the road to Damascus. This was actually the necessary logical outflowing of the great claim that is there all along. So Philip, chapter 8, verses 4 through to 40, Philip, the power of the gospel over against the magic of the pagans, the man called Simon who had practiced magic in the city, and Philip's message being believed in Samaria, so that already we're getting the outworking of that agenda in chapter 1. You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. That's being followed through here. And Philip particularly then has this strange scene, this wonderful story in verses 26 to 40, where he, Philip, is able to explain the meaning of Isaiah 53 to an Ethiopian eunuch. Now again, think Old Testament. Isaiah 53, of course, we instantly say, yes, that is one of the great passages about the meaning of the cross, and so it is. Like a sheep he was led to the slaughter, like a lamb before his shearers is dumb, so he doesn't open his mouth. And Philip starts with this passage and preaches about Jesus. But how does Isaiah 53 go on? Immediately after the glory of Isaiah 53, wounded for our trespasses, bruised for our iniquities, you have Isaiah 54, which is about the renewal of the covenant. And once the covenant has been renewed in Isaiah 54, you have the general invitation to new creation in Isaiah 55. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Instead of the thorn shall come up the myrtle. Instead of the briar shall come up the cedar tree. This is new creation. The work of the Messiah, the saving death and resurrection, produced new covenant and new creation. And what's Isaiah 56 say? Foreigners and eunuchs who join themselves to the people of God will be full members. That's astonishing, that sequence. And Luke wants you to have that whole thing in mind here. It's happening, he's saying. These scriptures are being fulfilled. Jesus died and was raised, therefore the new covenant has happened, therefore new creation is happening, and now the very people who the Jewish traditions themselves would have excluded, foreigners and eunuchs and others like that, are being welcomed in. Luke has not just told this story because it was an example of dramatic divine guidance, though it was that too. He is saying this is how all that is being fulfilled. Which brings us, of course, to our old friend Paul himself. I've written about this in a number of places, but let me just run it at you again. Paul, Saul of Tarsus, he saw himself in, say, Galatians 2, as the embodiment of what God had done to Israel. I, through the law, died to the law so that I could live to God. I have been crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. Now, no doubt Paul had experienced that intensely and personally, but the logic of Galatians 2:19 to 21 relates to the argument Paul is making in Galatians 2:15 to 18, which is not on the basis of his experience. So somebody else could turn around and say, well, Paul, I didn't experience it like that. It is that this is what God has done. He has taken his people Israel, zealous for Torah, and through the Torah itself, and through the death and resurrection of the Messiah, he has turned his people inside out to be at last what they were always intended to be, which is the people of God for the world. The deeply personal meaning relates directly to the wider meaning of the destiny of Israel, to be the bearers of God's promise for the world. You know, we had at the Lambeth Conference last year, one of the great moments of that very interesting and ambiguous occasion was a wonderful address by the chief rabbi of Great Britain, Jonathan Sacks, who is one of the great social and cultural and religious commentators of our time in the UK, Jonathan Sacks. And in the questions after his marvelous address, and it was terrific, he's a great preacher, talking about covenant, somebody said, please will you tell us honestly how you see us Christians and what we have done? And fascinatingly, he said, you have done what we were told to do and didn't do. He said, we were given this great message, which was for all people. He said, we have sat on it, and you have actually taken it out into the world. The point was this, he was acknowledging that this is the Jewish message for the world, but the church has actually done that. Of course, he got so many things wrong in the process, but that's the meaning of the story of the conversion of Saul.